Okay, let's just dive right in because honestly, we don't have a second to waste. If you're studying Cambridge A-level biology, there is a very high chance you are making a fatal error in syllabus topic 11.2 without even realizing it. I mean, it happens all the time. So in this explainer, we're going to completely deconstruct the hidden traps in active and passive immunity.
So consider this exact exam answer. A student writes, the patient got immunity from the vaccine. Sounds totally logical, right? I mean, it sounds correct. But here's the kicker. This specific answer scores absolutely 0 marks on a Cambridge exam paper. 0. This is the exact fatal mistake that costs students their grade boundaries every single year before they even realize what's happening. You know that feeling where you walk out of the exam hall feeling incredibly confident, only to get your results back and wonder, wait, where did it all go wrong? Well, the answer lies in exactly how you construct your biological reasoning. And the reason for that, 0 becomes glaringly obvious when we crack open the principal examiner report. They are literally flat out telling us that candidates provide generic answers that just aren't specific to the question context. They don't want a textbook definition blindly copy-pasted onto the page. No way. They want to see you apply the biological mechanism to the very specific scenario they've given you. So to do that, we kind of need to completely rebuild your foundation. Right, so we need to start by locking down the absolute core definitions. Active immunity occurs when the body's own immune system produces antibodies and memory cells in response to an antigen. Listen, the absolute non-negotiable keywords here are produces and memory cells. Active immunity requires your body to do the hard work. Your own immune system must encounter an antigen and actively manufacture those antibodies. And because your body goes through this primary immune response, it generates memory B and T cells. That right there, that is the biological key to long-term protection. Now, notice the stark contrast here with passive immunity. In this case, antibodies are introduced from an outside source. Your body isn't making them at all. Because your immune system isn't actually doing the work, there's no primary response, which means there are exactly 0 memory cells produced. Once those borrowed antibodies degrade and just break down in your bloodstream, the protection is totally gone. It is strictly temporary. So to make sure you never mix these up again, think of these 4 confusing concepts as a simple grid. We've got natural versus artificial on one side and active versus passive on the other. Think about it. If you catch a cold naturally and make your own antibodies, that's natural active. If you get a vaccine, which is an artificial injection of an antigen, and your body makes memory cells, that's artificial active. Now, what if a baby gets antibodies through breast milk naturally, but makes no memory cells? That's natural passive. And finally, if a patient is injected with monoclonal antibodies in a hospital setting for immediate temporary relief, you guessed it, that's artificial passive. You really need to hold that mental grid in your mind, but, well, here is the catch. In just a moment, I'm going to show you the exact examiner clue that flips the mark scheme totally in your favor. But first, you need the framework that makes that clue super obvious. Because honestly, simply memorizing the grid we just talked about, that's a massive trap. Yeah, ordinary revision completely fails you here. Rote memorization won't get you those top marks if you can't apply the concepts to an unfamiliar biological pathway. In the actual exam, they are not just going to ask you to define artificial active immunity. That'd be way too easy. Instead, they will give you a complex, multi-step scenario about a new pathogen, a highly specific patient profile, maybe a novel treatment, and then ask you to deduce exactly what is happening. To tackle that, you need what we call the method mark strategy. This is a systematic way to basically guarantee you pick up process marks, even if your final conclusion ends up being a bit tricky. First step, you identify the key elements in the stimulus text. Are we talking about antigens or antibodies being introduced? Second, you apply the relevant principle from our 2x2 grid. Third, execute your analysis with really clear step-by-step biological working. And fourth, verify your results against the data provided. This framework forces you to show your biological math, and that is exactly where the examiner method marks live.
Okay, let's put this into practice right now. Take a second and try to predict the correct answer here. Why would an examiner immediately deduct marks for this specific claim? A student writes that maternal antibodies provide long-term natural passive immunity. Do you spot the error? The fatal mistake is pairing the word long-term with passive. Remember our core definition from earlier? Passive immunity literally means no memory cells are created. Therefore, it is biologically impossible for it to be long-term. It is strictly 100% short-term.
Digging back into the principal examiner reports, there are three massive traps you absolutely must avoid. First up is confusing cause and effect, like saying a vaccine directly gives you immunity, rather than saying the vaccine introduces an antigen which actually causes an immune response. See the difference? Second, forgetting your terminology. You have to use words like antigen, antibody, lymphocyte, and memory cell flawlessly. And third, the all-time classic mistake, giving an answer that isn't specific to the context. If the question is about a rabies outbreak in foxes, your answer better mention foxes and the rabies virus, not just some generic textbook pathogen. To dodge those traps completely, you've got to follow this exact sequential formula whenever you deconstruct a stimulus material or a data table. First, state the core biological concept. Second, pull specific evidence or data directly from the question prompt. Third, provide the scientific reasoning that connects that data straight back to the concept. And finally, lock the whole thing in with precise examiner wording. This comparison perfectly pays off that question we asked earlier. Remember that 0-mark answer? The patient got immunity from the vaccine? Compare that flawed answer to a perfect top-band answer. The clue examiners desperately want to see is the specific integration of terms like antigens and memory cells linked directly to the context. A perfect answer uses our formula. It states the concept, artificial active immunity. It explains the evidence. It introduces antigens. It gives the reasoning, stimulating an immune response. And boom, it uses examiner wording, the production of memory cells for long-term protection. Now, when that exam clock is ticking and the pressure is super high, you can use a really simple memory hack, the acronym APNA. Active, passive, natural, artificial. Whenever you are faced with an immunity question, immediately scribble APNA in the margin of your paper. It serves as this instant anchor to our mental grid, making sure you don't accidentally mix up an artificial passive treatment with an artificial active vaccine while you're stressing over the clock. All right, let's raise the stakes a bit. What actually happens when the examiner asks you to evaluate evidence quality for a new monoclonal antibody treatment based on a data table? This isn't just about simple definitions anymore. The command word evaluate requires you to question assumptions. Are there limitations to the data? Are there alternative interpretations? You have to justify your final decision with concrete evidence from the graph or table they provide, constantly referring back to those golden rules of passive artificial immunity. So, what are your main takeaways to guarantee an A in this topic? Pretty simple. First, you absolutely must master those 4 quadrants of immunity. Second, rely heavily on the procedural framework, that method mark strategy, to show you're working. And third, never ever ignore the question's specific context. Every single point you make must be inextricably linked back to the exact biological scenario the examiner just presented to you. You might know everything about active and passive immunity by now. Your biology might be totally flawless, but there is a sneaky, hidden cause of lost marks lurking right in the command words of the question itself, and it completely dictates your mark band. If you treat a describe question the exact same way you treat an explain or evaluate question, you're going to lose up to half your marks, even if your science is perfectly correct. Because ultimately, the command word is the true gatekeeper to those top grades. In this explainer, we've fully decoded the biological mechanisms, but now it's really up to you to decode the examiner's language. So the very next time you sit down with a past paper, I want you to ask yourself, are you just blindly writing down biology, or are you actually answering the question being asked?